When I left my old neighborhood, I swore I'd never hear the letters HOA again for as long as I lived. You know that feeling when you finally sign the papers and think, that's it, I'm free. That was me, driving my pickup past those perfect lawns and identical mailboxes for the last time. My old HOA had rules for everything. You couldn't park your truck in the driveway overnight. You couldn't hang a flag unless it was approved size. And you sure couldn't build a shed without submitting blueprints like you were constructing the Pentagon. After my third fine in one summer, one for having a non-compliant mailbox color, I decided I'd had enough. I sold the house, packed up my tools, and bought myself a ranch. 50 acres, 2 barns, a stretch of gravel road, and not a single neighbor in sight. The first morning out there was perfect. The air smelled like cedar and fresh dirt. The only sound was wind sliding through the grass and a few cattle lowing in the distance. No leaf blowers, no barking HOA dogs, no committee meetings about mailbox heights, just peace. I remember standing there on my porch, coffee in hand, thinking this is what freedom feels like. And then I heard it. That sound, a soft electric hum, faint at first, then growing louder as it rolled up my driveway. I turned and my stomach sank. A golf cart. You have to understand, where I came from, the sight of a golf cart meant trouble. And this one was bright white, spotless, and moving with purpose. Behind the wheel was a woman wearing big sunglasses, a pink cardigan, and that expression every HOA president is born with. The polite half-smile of someone who's already written you a citation in her head. She pulled up next to my fence and looked around like she was inspecting an alien planet. "Hello there," she said, voice sweet as artificial sugar. "Welcome to the neighborhood." I nodded, "Thanks, but I'm not really in the neighborhood. My property line starts right here." She tilted her head, clearly not hearing what she wanted. "Oh, I know, but we like to keep everything around here nice and tidy. It reflects on all of us, even the adjoining properties. Just a friendly suggestion, you might think about painting that barn a neutral color. Something less red." I laughed, couldn't help it. "Ma'am, this isn't your HOA's concern. I'm outside your boundary. You can check the map." She smiled tighter. "We like to keep things consistent out here. People appreciate uniformity." "Yeah," I said, "I appreciate privacy." She blinked twice, then scribbled something on her clipboard before driving off. That was my first encounter with Karen, the self-appointed guardian of order. I figured she'd get bored and move on. I was wrong. The next morning, I walked out to feed the horses and found an envelope taped to my gate. White, crisp, and printed with that all-too-familiar HOA logo. Inside was a notice of violation, citing unsightly barn color and unauthorized livestock enclosure. I actually laughed out loud. Then I drove into town, bought a big red stamp and stamped it in block letters. "Return to sender, not a member." I mailed it right back to her. That should have been the end of it. But a few days later, I caught sight of that same golf cart again, parked just beyond my property line. Karen was sitting inside, binoculars in her lap, pretending to check her phone while glancing toward my barn. I walked over, leaned on the fence and said, "You bird watching or just checking if my grass meets code?" She jumped. "Oh, I was just admiring your, landscaping." "Glad you like it," I said. "I let nature handle the design work." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll find we have certain expectations around here." "I'm sure you do," I said, "but I don't live under them." She didn't reply, just drove off in a hurry, gravel popping under her tires. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and unfolded the property survey again. My land was clearly outside the HOA's jurisdiction, no doubt about it. But something caught my eye, a narrow stretch of gravel cutting across the corner of my property, marked private access. I'd assumed it was just part of my driveway, but it led straight to the HOA's gated entrance. I frowned, tracing the line with my finger. Could that road belong to me? The next day, I went down to the county clerk's office to check the records. The clerk pulled up the digital map, zoomed in, and nodded. Yep, that entire stretch, from the county highway to their entrance, it's your land. Shows right here, private property. I must have grinned like a kid on Christmas morning, because suddenly everything made sense. Corinne's constant hovering, her fake, friendly tone, those letters, she wasn't just being nosy. She was terrified. She figured out before I did that her precious HOA had been driving through my land every single day just to reach their community. I walked back out into the evening light, gravel crunching under my boots, and looked down that road. Cars were already rolling past, families heading home from work, kids on bikes, even Corinne's golf cart buzzing along like she owned the place. They all passed right over my dirt. For the first time since I'd moved there, I smiled, not the friendly kind, but the kind that comes when you realize the universe just handed you a little cosmic justice. Corinne thought she ran this neighborhood, but soon she was going to find out whose ground she'd been standing on. And I couldn't wait to see her face when she did. After that first week, I realized peace and quiet were only going to exist between the hours of midnight and whenever Corinne's morning coffee kicked in. It started small. At first, it was just her golf cart parked near my fence line, pretending to check the landscaping. Then, I started getting more envelopes in the mail, not from the HOA this time, but from the county. Anonymous complaints about unregistered livestock, water runoff issues, and noise violations. Now, there's only one person in a 10-mile radius who'd care enough to file that many complaints, and she drove a white golf cart with HOA stenciled on the back in faded gold letters. I tried to ignore it. Really, I did. I'd escaped that life for a reason. But then one morning, I walked outside to find something spray-painted across my mailbox. 3 letters, big and sloppy, HOA. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just being nosy, she was declaring war. So I decided to get strategic. I started keeping a notebook by my kitchen window, jotting down every time she rolled by. Monday, 8:13 a.m. Tuesday, 5:41 p.m. Wednesday, twice before noon. I even noticed she slowed down whenever my truck was gone, like she was casing the place. One afternoon, I caught her standing on the far side of the fence, snapping pictures of my barn. I walked right up to her and said, "You need help finding the no trespassing sign, or are you just collecting souvenirs?" She jumped, clutched her phone like it was evidence, and said, "Just documenting community impact." "Community impact," I repeated. "Lady, the only community on this side of the fence is me, and I didn't invite you." She gave a tight smile. "We're all part of the same ecosystem. What happens on your land affects us." "Then maybe stop breathing my air," I muttered. She didn't like that. Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I could see it, that flicker of fury underneath her civil exterior. She wasn't used to being talked back to. That night, I got an email from the HOA office. It started with "Dear Property Owner," and went on to list violations observed from adjacent property. They weren't even pretending I was a member, they were just scolding me for not following their rules. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my drink. Then I wrote back one line. "Not your property, not your problem." The next day, Corinne showed up in person. It was early afternoon, hot, dusty, and she came marching down the road like she was leading a crusade. 3 board members followed behind her, all of them holding clipboards and bottled water like they were heading into battle. She called out, "We need to have a discussion about your barn. The color violates community standards." I stared at her for a second, letting that sink in. "Community standards," I said. "Corinne, the nearest house from me is half a mile away. You can't even see my barn from your subdivision unless you bring binoculars." Which, by the way, you did. One of her board members piped up, "It's about consistency, sir. The red paint is visually disruptive." I grinned. Good, I was aiming for disruptive. They didn't like that answer. Corinne muttered something about fines and legal steps and stormed off. But as she left, I noticed something. Her golf cart, the same one she used to inspect the neighborhood, was coming down my road. That's when it hit me. They had no other way in or out. Every single HOA resident, every SUV, every delivery truck, they all had to drive across my land to reach their homes. The next day, I went to the county office to confirm what I already suspected. And sure enough, the clerk looked up the parcel map and said, "Yep, that road's on your property. HOA been using it for years, looks like. No easement filed either." I must have looked like I just won the lottery. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a barn color or a petty neighbor. This was about ownership, power, and boundaries, literal ones. That night, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, watching the last HOA car roll past on my gravel. I could hear the crunch of their tires, the little puffs of dust rising behind them. And for the first time, I realized something beautiful. They thought I was just another country fool with a barn. But every time they went home, every time Karen sent one of her warning letters or called a meeting, she was standing on my road. My land, my rules. I finished my drink, smiled to myself, and said out loud, "All right, Karen. Let's see how much you like consistency when the road under your tires belongs to me." I didn't know exactly how yet, but I was going to make sure she remembered that lesson for the rest of her HOA career. And I wasn't planning on sending her another polite email to do it. When the new fence posts started going into the ground, I knew things were about to get loud, and not just from the hammering. See, the road leading into the HOA community technically ran through a strip of my property, a long, dusty ranch road that split my land and theirs. They had an easement, sure, but it was an old, loosely worded one. Back when the place was just open pasture and the road was nothing more than a cow trail. The HOA had paved it later, assumed it was theirs, and no one had ever challenged it. Until now. The first truckload of lumber got delivered around 7 a.m., and by 7:30 I saw her, Karen, standing at the edge of the road in her morning robe, clutching a cup of coffee like she was holding court. She squinted at the work crew, hands on hips, mouth already moving. I couldn't hear her from the porch, but I knew that tone. The HOA tone. By the time I walked down there, she was lecturing my foreman about community access and property boundaries. I stepped in. "Morning, Karen, something wrong?" She turned, her expression souring like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Mark, you can't just build fences across the access road. That belongs to the community." I pulled a folded document from my jacket pocket, the old county map, yellowed and creased. "Actually, it doesn't. You've got an easement, which means you can use the road, but the land, that's mine." She gave that little fake chuckle people do when they think you're bluffing. "Oh, you've misunderstood, dear. Our HOA paid to pave that road. We maintain it." "Then you should have checked whose dirt it's on," I said. "I just don't want anyone driving where they're not supposed to anymore. You know, liability reasons." That word liability, it made her twitch. She stormed off, phone already out. Within an hour, 2 more HOA board members pulled up, one in a golf cart, the other in a Lexus. They argued, pointed, waved papers around, and finally left. The crew kept working. By noon, half the fence was up, and my phone buzzed with a call from an unavailable number. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on the porch, poured myself some iced tea, and watched the dust clouds rise from the road like smoke signals. It didn't take long for the retaliation to begin. That evening, a county code officer showed up. He was polite, almost apologetic. "Got a complaint about an unpermitted structure," he said, flipping through his clipboard. I showed him the permits, all legitimate. He nodded, clearly unimpressed by whoever had sent him. "Yeah, figured as much. HOA types, huh? We get these calls a lot. You'd be surprised how many think county land belongs to them." "Oh, I wouldn't," I said. "Trust me." He left with a grin, and I knew that was strike one for Karen. The next morning, they tried a different tactic. Someone parked two HOA vehicles right at the start of the ranch road, blocking my crew's access. When I approached, the driver, a guy I'd seen mowing the HOA lawns before, rolled down his window. "Sorry, sir. HOA directive. Can't allow construction that interferes with community travel." I smiled. That's funny, because according to the sheriff's office, that's trespassing. He looked at me like he didn't quite believe it, until the two deputies I'd called earlier drove up behind me, lights flashing just enough to make a point. Karen appeared again, shouting about her rights as HOA president, but the deputies didn't care. They gave her 10 minutes to clear the vehicles or they'd be impounded. She sputtered, fumed, and eventually retreated. By the end of the day, the fence was complete, a clean, wooden barrier running along the edge of my ranch, with one large metal gate and a simple lock. I wasn't cutting them off entirely, not yet. I just wanted to remind them where the line was drawn. But lines have a way of becoming battlefields. That night, I caught the flicker of headlights outside my window, a car creeping along the fence line, then the crunch of gravel. I stepped out onto the porch with my flashlight and found Karen herself, standing by the gate, rattling the lock. She froze when the beam hit her. "Karen," I called out, calm as could be, "you planning to dig under it next?" She straightened her blazer. She'd changed out of pajamas for this mission and snapped, "You can't keep this road closed. I'm calling the county tomorrow. You'll regret this." I took a step closer. "You already called the county. They sent a man, remember?" Her jaw tightened. She turned and stomped off into the night. I knew then this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back down. She was the kind to double down. And when she couldn't win through rules, she'd try to bend them. As I watched her car's taillights fade into the dark, I muttered to myself, if she wants a fence war, she's got one. And I had no idea how far she'd go to try and tear it down. If you've ever dealt with an HOA president who loses a fight, you know what comes next. They don't lick their wounds, they reload their paperwork. By the next week, I was getting letters. Real, printed envelopes with the HOA logo and Karen's signature at the bottom, except I wasn't even part of their HOA. That's what made it hilarious. The first letter said, "You are in violation of community standards for constructing a barrier that disrupts neighborhood continuity." Neighborhood continuity. That one made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. My barrier wasn't even inside their neighborhood. It was my land, my gate, my rules. Still, the letters kept coming, each more absurd than the last. One threatened fines. Another claimed my fence violated shared scenic access, whatever that meant. Then came the cherry on top, a notice for a mandatory compliance hearing at the HOA clubhouse. I pinned it to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a cow and wrote underneath in Sharpie, "Sure, why not?" But when I showed up, it wasn't a hearing. It was an ambush. Karen was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table like a judge in a suburban courtroom. Two board members flanked her, both looking like they regretted being there. She smiled that brittle smile. "Mr. Dawson, thank you for coming. We'd like to discuss your continued non-compliance." I took a seat. You know I'm not a member, right? So technically this meeting, about as official as poker night. She ignored that. "Your new fence has caused considerable disruption to residents. It limits access, creates division, and has generated numerous complaints." Division, I leaned back in my chair. "Karen, it's literally a fence, that's the point." Her smile vanished. "We can escalate this to county zoning if we must." "Oh, I hope you do," I said, pulling out a copy of the county plat map. "Because when they see this, they'll remind you whose land your community driveway's sitting on." That ended the meeting. But the real retaliation didn't come through letters or speeches. It came through dirt. A few nights later, I noticed tire tracks leading up from the road to my fence, fresh ones, cutting through the ditch. The next morning, one of my fence panels was down, just one, cut clean through at the hinges. I didn't need fingerprints to know who'd done it. Instead of calling the sheriff, I decided to play along. I replaced the broken section, but this time I added a little something, a set of motion-triggered trail cameras hidden inside the posts. Out here, we use them for coyotes. But Karen, she was a whole different kind of predator. Sure enough, 2 nights later, my cameras caught her in high definition, headlights off, flashlight in hand, wearing gloves, trying to loosen the gate latch. She wasn't even subtle about it. The next morning, I printed the photos, slipped them in a manila envelope, and taped it to her front door with a note. Smile for the camera, trespassing, a county offense. That was the day she stopped pretending to be civil. By afternoon, she was at my gate again, this time with a sheriff's deputy in tow. She waved him over as if she'd just caught me red-handed. There, that's the illegal obstruction I told you about. The deputy was a tall guy with a kind of I've-seen-everything face. He looked at the fence, then at me. "Sir, can I see your property deed?" I handed it over. He studied it, nodded, and then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, this road runs through Mr. Dawson's land. His fence is within his rights. Unless he's blocking emergency access, he's good." Karen's eyes went wide. "But this road serves the whole community." He sighed. Then maybe the community should have built its own road instead of using his. And just like that, the law, the very thing she'd been threatening me with, backed me up. Karen didn't speak. She just glared, her face red enough to match her blazer. Then she pointed a finger at me and hissed, "This isn't over." She was right. Because that night, I caught her again, not breaking anything this time, but standing by the fence, just staring at it. No flashlight, no tools, just staring, like she couldn't believe she'd lost control over something. It wasn't about a road anymore. It was about pride. About a woman who'd built her identity on being the queen of the cul-de-sac, suddenly realizing her crown didn't fit out here. I knew she'd be back. People like Karen always come back. But next time I wasn't going to defend. Next time I was going to strike first. If there's one thing I learned living under HOA rule, it's this. The best revenge isn't loud, it's perfectly legal and painfully effective. After the fence war and her late-night break-in attempts, Karen had pushed things too far. She wasn't just annoying anymore, she was dangerous. So I decided to stop reacting and start planning. I spent a few nights going through old property documents, county records, and something most HOA presidents forget to check, the fine print of their own easement agreement. It turned out, decades ago, the original owner of my land had allowed limited residential access through the road under the condition that maintenance would be shared. Meaning, if the HOA ever failed to maintain or coordinate with the property owner, that access could be revoked. Guess what? They paved the road years ago without so much as a courtesy call, which meant, legally speaking, I had every right to shut it down. But just locking the gate again would have been too easy and too predictable. No, I wanted her to feel it. So I made a few calls. The first was to the county's Department of Public Works. I asked about permits to reroute a small section of ranch road for private access, the kind that didn't require HOA input. The second was to a local construction company that owed me a favor from a previous job. By the end of the week, I had a crew scheduled to start trenching a new drive across the southern edge of my land. To Karen, it probably looked like another illegal project, but this one was going to be the nail in the coffin. When the bulldozers arrived, she came running down the road in her sun hat and heels like she was marching into a courtroom. "Mark, what do you think you're doing?" she shouted, waving her phone around. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and said, "Just building my own road. Independent access, remember. That way you and your neighbors can have yours all to yourselves." Her eyes widened. "You can't just cut off a community like that." I shrugged. "Actually, I can. You'll still have access until the new easement expires. Then you'll need to talk to the county about putting in your own road." You wouldn't dare. Oh, I'd do more than dare, I said. I'd draw up the paperwork. And I did. Within a few days, I submitted a formal notice of easement termination, legally served, notarized, and entirely within my rights. The HOA had 60 days to establish an alternate route. 60 days to realize their entire neighborhood depended on the goodwill of a man they'd been threatening for months. Karen didn't take it well. She called emergency HOA meetings, circulated petitions, even tried to guilt-trip local officials into protecting the community. But when the county reviewed the documents, they confirmed it. The HOA had violated the maintenance clause years ago. They had no standing to stop me. You could practically hear the panic spreading through their cul-de-sac. Residents started showing up at my gate, not angry, just confused. Most of them were decent people who didn't even realize the road wasn't public. A few even apologized for Karen's behavior. One older guy, a veteran, shook my hand and said, "She's been running this place like a dictatorship. You're doing us a favor." It was the first time I actually felt bad for them. They weren't the problem. She was. Then something unexpected happened. Karen started losing support. The same people she'd bossed around for years started questioning her leadership. Rumors spread that some wanted to replace her. And that's when she got desperate. One evening, I was walking the fence line when I noticed tire tracks again, but this time they didn't stop at the gate. They went through it. Karen had rammed it with her SUV. The metal was bent, the lock shattered, the post cracked clean through. I just stood there in the headlights, glare, watching as she stumbled out of the driver's seat, face red and shaking. "You think you can take everything from me," she screamed. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" "Karen," I said quietly, "you did that all by yourself." She lunged toward me, but I stepped back and pulled out my phone. I wasn't bluffing this time. The sheriff was already on the way. When they arrived, they didn't need convincing. Between the photos, the damage, and her prior trespassing warnings, it was enough. They cuffed her right there on the road. I'll never forget the look on her face, disbelief, like she still couldn't understand how her HOA badge didn't carry authority out here. As the patrol car pulled away, one deputy turned to me and said, "You sure know how to pick your battles." "Yeah," I replied, "but I also know how to end them." Still, as I watched the taillights fade into the night, I knew this wasn't the real end. Because if Karen was anything, it was stubborn. And the kind of woman who built empires out of rules doesn't go down quietly. She'd be back, but when she did, she wouldn't find the same ranch she thought she could control. The morning after Karen's arrest, I expected peace, maybe even a little quiet satisfaction. Instead, I woke up to a convoy of HOA board members parked outside my gate like they were staging a suburban protest. 3 cars, 4 people in polo shirts, 1 clipboard. It was like an invasion, except no one brought donuts. The man in front, a balding guy named Jeff, raised his hands as I walked down my driveway. "Morning, Mark. We just want to talk," he said, voice polite but shaky. "Talk about what?" I asked, leaning on the gate. "You here to apologize for your fearless leader ramming my property, or do you need a reminder that this isn't an HOA meeting?" Jeff sighed. "Look, none of us wanted this to go that far. Karen, she's been under pressure. The community's divided. We just want to resolve this before it gets worse." "Before it gets worse," I repeated. "You mean before you all lose access to your homes?" They exchanged looks. I could see the fear in their eyes, fear not of me, but of their own dependence. For years, they'd assumed the road was theirs, like oxygen or sunlight. Now they were realizing they'd been breathing through a straw I owned. I unlocked the gate slowly. "Come in, let's talk." We sat on the porch. They explained that Karen was out on bail, banned from contacting me but still technically HOA president. The board wanted to mediate. They offered to pay for repairs, even suggested reinstating the maintenance clause properly. I listened, sipping my coffee, pretending to consider it, but I wasn't ready to make it easy. Not yet. Here's my offer, I said finally. You cover all damages. You put in writing that you acknowledge the road is on my land, and you agree that any future access depends on mutual consent, not HOA jurisdiction. Jeff nodded quickly. We can do that. Good, I said, because I'm already building my alternate route. Once it's done, that gate's closing for good. You'll have 60 days to sort out your own road with the county. The color drained from their faces. You cut us off, one woman whispered. I leaned forward. I didn't cut anyone off. I just stopped pretending you owned what you didn't. They left quietly after that, murmuring among themselves. For a while, it seemed like the storm had finally broken. The noise stopped. No more letters, no more shouting, just construction sounds and wide, open sky. But peace never lasts long when Karen's involved. 2 weeks later, she was back, not physically, but through proxies. Flyers started appearing in nearby mailboxes accusing me of endangering the community and destroying neighborly trust. Someone even created a Facebook group called Save Our Road. They posted photos of my fence, my trucks, my house, like I was a villain in some neighborhood crime saga. I ignored it at first, then I got a call from a local reporter. Mr. Dawson, we've been told there's a dispute between you and the Oakwood Estates HOA. Would you like to comment? That's when I realized Karen was trying to win the one battle. She still could, public opinion. So I gave the reporter a tour. I showed him the property lines, the county maps, the easement documents. I told him about the trespassing, the vandalism, the arrest. By the time he left, he looked half amused, half horrified. When the story aired 2 days later, the headline was perfect. Rancher legally outsmarts HOA, president faces charges. Karen must have seen it too, because that night, her Facebook group went quiet. A few comments popped up from residents saying things like, "We didn't know about the road ownership, and maybe it's time for new leadership." The next day, I saw a moving truck parked in front of Karen's house. She wasn't arrested again, but from what I heard later, she was forced to step down. The HOA board voted her out unanimously. I stood at the fence that afternoon, looking toward their little community. It was strange. After all the shouting and scheming, I almost felt sorry for her. She built her life around control, around being the one who decided what color your mailbox should be or where you parked your truck. And in one move, it was gone. The road that used to connect her world to mine now divided us completely. But I wasn't done yet. See, in the process of rerouting my road, I discovered something else. Something buried in the paperwork that Karen and her HOA had conveniently ignored for years. And that discovery, it was about to turn my small victory into total checkmate. When the dust settled and Karen was finally out of power, I thought that was the end. But fate has a sense of humor and a good memory for irony. A week after her moving truck disappeared down the road, I went to the county clerk's office to finalize paperwork for my new access road. It was supposed to be routine, stamp here, sign there, done. But the clerk, a friendly older man named Tom, squinted at one of the easement documents and said, You ever notice this?" He turned the page and pointed to a faded paragraph near the bottom. The ink was light, the print old-fashioned. It read, "Any entity utilizing the access road shall contribute to its upkeep in proportion to property usage. Failing to do so for a period exceeding 15 consecutive years shall void their right-of-way." 15 years. Tom chuckled. "Looks like the HOA never paid a dime since they paved that thing. You've got them on technical default." I stared at the paper, a slow grin spreading across my face. That clause wasn't just a footnote, it was a detonator. Karen had been wrong all along. Their easement wasn't permanent. It expired when they stopped maintaining it, which, according to county records, had been almost 2 decades ago. Tom, I said, trying not to sound too thrilled, you think this holds up? He shrugged. Legally, absolutely. You could close that road tomorrow if you wanted. I left the office with the document in my hand and a dozen new ideas swirling in my head. That night, I walked the fence line under a bright full moon, the gravel crunching under my boots. The road was quiet, eerily so. Without Karen's drama, the neighborhood had gone silent, like the air before a storm. But I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. This was about closure, about ending years of petty tyranny once and for all. So I did something Karen never saw coming. I gave the HOA a choice. The next morning, I drafted a letter, calm, professional, airtight. It explained the clause, the violation, and my right to terminate their access effective immediately. But it also offered a solution. They could either pay their back maintenance fees, every penny they'd skipped for the last 20 years, or agree to construct their own independent road. I even included the estimated cost of road upkeep, adjusted for inflation. It wasn't cheap. I mailed it to every single homeowner in the community, certified, return receipt. By evening, my phone was buzzing again. Some were furious, some were panicked, but most were surprisingly understanding. Turns out, once Karen was gone, people started seeing the truth. They admitted she'd kept them in the dark about the easement, that she'd lied, saying the road was HOA property, when really it was a borrowed privilege built on arrogance and asphalt. Then came the board's official reply, a neatly worded letter signed by the new president, Jeff. He apologized for Karen's actions, acknowledged the clause, and asked for an extension while they reassessed options. I gave them 30 days. Over the next few weeks, things got interesting. Surveyors started showing up, marking stakes along the backside of the HOA neighborhood. I'd drive by and see residents watching nervously as crews discussed possible detours. I knew exactly what they were doing, planning a new road that bypassed my land completely. But here's the twist: they couldn't. The terrain behind their lots was steep, uneven, and partly owned by the county's protected wetlands, meaning any alternate route would cost a fortune and require state approval. They were boxed in, literally and legally. Meanwhile, I quietly reinforced my own gate, installed new signage, and updated my property filings. When the 30 days were up, I delivered the final notice. Effective immediately, the Oakwood Estates HOA's right-of-way was terminated. The next morning, I locked the gate for the last time. That evening, I sat on my porch and watched as a convoy of HOA residents gathered at the fence, headlights flickering, phones out, voices raised. Some begged, some yelled, but most just stood there, realizing the road they'd taken for granted all those years was gone. One man shouted, "You can't do this. We've lived here 20 years." I called back, calm as ever, "Then you should have read your contract 20 years ago." It was poetic, really. Karen had spent years telling me how the HOA protected property values. And now, without their road, the same HOA she'd ruled over was watching their property values tank. The irony wasn't lost on me. By sunset, the crowd dispersed. The dust settled once again, and for the first time since this whole mess started, the silence didn't feel like tension, it felt like peace. I poured myself a drink, looked out over the quiet hills, and whispered, "Game over, Karen." But fate wasn't quite done with her yet. Because 3 days later, I saw something that froze me mid-step, a moving van parked outside the old HOA clubhouse. And stepping out of the driver's seat was Karen. 3 days after I had locked the gate for good, I was enjoying a rare quiet evening on the porch when I saw headlights approaching. At first, I didn't pay much attention, until I realized it was the old HOA clubhouse parking lot, and someone was unpacking a moving van. Karen! She stepped out wearing the same red blazer, sunglasses perched on her head like she still thought she was the queen of Oakwood Estates. Only now there was no golf cart, no entourage, just her, and an air of determination that was equal parts fury and desperation. I watched her unpack boxes, set up a folding chair, and unfurl a large banner that read, "The community deserves access." I took a deep breath. She hadn't learned. She thought if she could make a public spectacle, she could intimidate me like she did to everyone else. I walked down the gravel road to meet her, my boots crunching on the stones. "Evening, Karen. Come for another inspection." She glared. "Mark, this isn't a joke. You cannot keep an entire neighborhood from their homes." "Actually," I said, folding my arms, "I can, and I already did." She stomped closer, voice rising. "This road is essential, people rely on it. You're risking lawsuits, community outrage, and—" I cut her off, holding up a hand. "Karen, let me remind you, you're not part of this HOA anymore, you're not president. And as for the road, every legal option has been exhausted. The easement is terminated. Your community, your problem." Her face turned red. The little flares of fire I had imagined all along finally ignited in full fury. She shouted something about retaliation, about keeping me accountable, but I couldn't help smirking. Because here's the thing about Karen, she thrived on control. And control, that's exactly what she had lost. Over the next hour, I watched her make every mistake a self-righteous HOA president could make. She tried calling neighbors to rally them. Most of them were already coming to terms with the truth. The road wasn't theirs. She tried posting online about heroic resistance, but the post got buried under fact-checked maps and county records I had sent to the local news. And then, she made the biggest mistake of all. She tried to physically open the gate. I didn't have to run, I didn't have to yell. I just stepped forward, gestured to the camera I'd installed months ago to monitor her trespassing attempts, and said, "Karen, one more time and the sheriff will be called." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, I saw it, the spark of recognition, the exact moment she realized she couldn't bully her way through real life. By the next morning, Karen was gone again, this time for good. I heard later she had moved to another state, likely trying to start over somewhere her HOA experience wouldn't follow her. The community, meanwhile, finally came to peace with the new reality. Some residents arranged a private access road behind their properties, funded partially by the HOA's emergency fund, which had been depleted trying to defend Karen's nonsense. Others decided to sell and move on. As for me, I stood at my gate, looking out over the rolling hills of my ranch, and finally let myself relax. The fence was secure, the cameras still recording for peace of mind, and the gravel road stretching beyond the gate was mine. My land, my rules. I poured a cold drink and leaned back on my porch swing. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the hills. I smiled, thinking about all the emails, calls, and letters Karen had sent, the countless threats that had fueled months of headaches. None of it mattered now. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had spent years defining herself by authority, regulations, and control. And in one move, in a quiet, lawful, perfectly executed move, I had shown her the true cost of obsession over power. It wasn't just about a fence, a road, or even a barn anymore. It was about principle, about boundaries, about knowing when to fight and when to let the law and a little patience do the work for you. As the stars began to shine overhead, I whispered to myself, sometimes the only way to win is to let them drive themselves into a dead end. And for the first time in years, I felt what true freedom really meant. Quiet, peaceful, and utterly satisfying. Karen had lost her kingdom. I had kept my ranch. And the road was finally mine. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.